Hey everybody, here we are, 1.2 terrestrial biomes, the second lesson that we are going through in our AP Environmental Science curriculum. All right, we're moving right along, so without further ado, let's get to those standards that the College Board wants us to understand. At the end of this lesson, essential knowledge, you should be able to answer it off. If you want to go back, look at it and be like, hey, I don't really think I understood that one, ask me, we'll gladly go over it a little bit more. But I think at the end of this, you'll probably be pretty confident in your abilities to answer some of the essential content. So last lesson, we talked about levels of organization within an ecosystem. We talked about all the way from single organism up to an ecosystem, and then we jumped up to a biosphere. Well, then between ecosystem and biosphere, we can kind of divide up the Earth into something called a biome, or multiple biomes for better example. Now, what is a biome? Well, a biome is a large chunk of the Earth that experiences very, very similar climatic conditions. Because it experiences similar climatic conditions, meaning its temperature, its precipitation, it is going to have specially adapted organisms to that area. Now, I go back and forth on these things with some other teachers often, especially when we look back at biocurriculum. The biocurriculum says that a biome is determined by the flora and the fauna that exist in that area. Yes and no. Okay, yes, in that the organisms that live there are going to be determining a biome. But no, in that they're not what actually determines what grows there. What determines what grows there is the climatic conditions. So it's more important for you to understand the climatic conditions than to understand what organisms will grow there. So they are very closely related, but if you ask me what characteristics I use to determine a biome, it is going to be the climate more than it is going to be the organisms. Now, one of the things we want to talk about is how do all of these things interact, and how then do we go about comparing different biomes of the world. There are many different biomes of the world, many different climatic conditions that can be met. And so we want to have a way in which we can display those characteristics. And that is where this climograph comes in. A climograph, I love them. I love them because what you're doing is you're really taking something out in the real world and you're putting it down into a graphical or data-based presentation. So let me go and explain this to you. So I'm just going to sit down here so I can mark up the computer screen as we go. All right. So what we first look at is on this graph, we have two axes going vertical. So you have one and here's the other. The one is precipitation. All right. The other one is going to be temperature. Now, the big thing to understand is that, yes, in America, we use inches and degrees Fahrenheit. No one else around the world does. So for the most part, you will see precipitation in centimeters and you will see temperature displayed in degrees Celsius. Along the x-axis here, you have months of the year. And it starts with January and then it ends with December. This is how we create our climographs. And then what you do is you pump in all the data for it. Now, again, we have temperature and precipitation. So what we are going to do is we're going to take the average temperature of the month, and what we're going to do is display that as a line graph. So this line graph that goes up and over here, that is our average temperature. Okay, and then each bar you see down here, that is the amount on average of rainfall that they will get per month per year. So what they've done is they've taken the monthly average of precipitation and then they've carried it out through the course of the year. So what this allows us to do is really get a representation of what the biome could look like. Now, different biomes are going to have different characteristics. If we were comparing a tropical rainforest to a tropical desert, yes, the temperatures might be very, very similar, but the precipitation levels will be very different, all right, drastically different. And it's that understanding of the temperature and the precipitation that I want you to use to help to compare the different biomes. All right, so let's talk about what it means to be a terrestrial biome. Terrestrial. The word terrestrial is derived from the word terra, meaning land. All right, so sometimes you'll hear people refer to terra firma and various other things like that. It's solid land. Now, These are all of our land biomes. We're not looking at our aquatic biomes. That's the next lesson. We're going to get to those. So if you're really interested in learning all about the oceans, hang tight and I'll see you at the next lesson. Right now, we're focusing on land-based biomes. Now, they're distributed across the Earth's surface, and it's actually interesting to see how they're distributed. A lot of people think that certain things are only found in certain areas, but it's actually so many pieces all working together that determine what biomes are in different areas. It could be how close are you to different oceans? What directions are the winds going? What direction are the convection currents in the oceans traveling? All of those things factor together to form your specific biome. Right? Now, I swear I clicked it. Okay, the different locations on the planet. One of the things that people think is that the planet's been stagnant. It hasn't. Right? The surface of the planet has been moving. We're going to get to that, I believe, in chapter 4 or unit 4. But the idea that the current locations that's all they are, is they're current. So the climatic conditions we currently experience in Pennsylvania allow us to have a deciduous forest. That wasn't always the case. Pennsylvania used to be found near the equator. And because of it, we are in tropical forest habitat. So a lot of the underlying materials in Pennsylvania are tropical. And how do we know that? Well, we have coal. And all that coal that we have in Pennsylvania was formed from tropical swamps. So if we had tropical swamps growing here, it means we had to be closer to the tropics. So that has actually caused the surface of the planet to change, and therefore putting different stressors on organisms. Now, here's the big thing to understand. The planet has been moving. Now, it's not moving fast. It's moving very slowly. All right. So Pennsylvania, in our region of the planet, we've been moving from the tropics away. Different things are moving maybe towards the tropics. The one thing that is happening, though, on the planet that is actually causing more stress than this natural rate of migration of the tectonic plates is climate change. And we're going to address that later on in the year, but it is going to be an underlying theme. I want you to understand that climate change and the warming of the planet is leading to the extinction of more species due to changing of climates and changing of almost biomes. We're almost migrating or forcing our biomes to migrate. Now, for some organisms, that's pretty easy to do. A bird can pick up and fly to a new habitat. But what the bird eats, however, might be struggling a little bit more. You know, it's not like you can really just see a tree pack up its roots and run north 150, 500 miles, something like that. It's not that feasible. So we have to really understand that what we are doing to the planet through climate change is actually having a very big impact on all species on the planet. All right, let me get off my little soapbox there for climate change and get back to biomes on the planet. We can also represent biomes in a different way here. What we're representing here is the average temperature versus the annual precipitation. So if we look over here, you see all the way to the right of this graph, this is the hot biomes, the tropical biomes. Then if you go all the way to the left, these are the cold biomes. Then if you go from the ground, the low level here, it's very low precipitation, all the way up to high precipitation. So depending on where you fall on those two variables, again, temperature and precipitation, again, when I go back to climatic conditions, it's going to determine where you fall on this. Now, what we have, according to the College Board, limited the number of biomes down to. Now, there are many different ways in which we can represent the number of biomes, from anywhere from 12 to 15 to some people only say 9 different types. I don't have a horse in this race. I don't care. Just tell me how many you want me to teach, and I will teach it. Do I think that some of them can be broken down even more? Yeah. Do I think that some of them are maybe too broken down? No, I'm a much more specific learner than anything. So I'd like to actually have more specific details between them than some of them have right now, but it's okay. I don't lose sleep over this. Taiga, also known as the boreal forest or the coniferous forest. Temperate rainforest, temperate seasonal forest, which is commonly referred to as the deciduous forest, tropical rainforest, shrubland, temperate grassland, savanna, desert, tundra. So let's talk first about tropical versus temperate. What does it mean to be tropical? What does it mean to be temperate? If you are a tropical area, it means you exist within the tropics. The tropics are here, 23.5 degrees north, 23.5 degrees south. Why do we refer to that region as the tropics? Well, that actually has to do with the rotation of the Earth around the sun and the tilt of the Earth on its axis. But that region experiences more annual solar energy than any other region on the planet. So that is our tropical region. It is oftentimes very, very warm, which means that it does not get the full seasonalities. It's pretty consistent in its temperature throughout the course of the year. So it doesn't really experience winters. It doesn't experience all these other things that maybe a temperate climate would experience. Getting into the first biome that we want to talk about, the taiga, also known as the boreal forest, also known as the coniferous forest, and I have commonly nicknamed it the spruce moose forest, among many other people probably utilize the same thing. Coniferous forest referring to conifers or pine trees or evergreen trees. So boreal forest, coniferous forest, spruce moose forest, taiga, all the same thing. It's north of us, Canada. Think of southern Canada before you hit the tree line of Canada. It's slightly cooler. There's slightly less water. If you want to put, again, southern Canada, Maine, Russia, anywhere you have pine trees. So anytime you've ever seen like these survival video type things up in the snowy pine forest, that is taiga. All right, dominated by coniferous trees. Because they photosynthesize year-round at a slower rate, they are able to survive up here. Now, why don't we get deciduous trees up there, or what we would call broadleaf trees like we have around here, maples, oaks? Why don't they exist there? Well, they drop their leaves in the winter. Why do they actually drop their leaves? It's to prevent water loss. All right, it's not because there's less sunlight available. There's still enough sunlight to photosynthesize. Not a ton, but there's enough. But it's actually due to water loss. But pine trees have evolved to be able to survive there. So spruce, fir, pine, they all survive there with no problem. Less sunlight. Looking at the climatogram here, you can see temperature kind of goes up. It does go above freezing for maybe 40% of the year, but for most of the year it is freezing temperatures. I probably sit down so I can just kind of point some different things out over the course of these slides. All right, next we have the temperate rainforest. Very, very small region of the earth that is temperate rainforest. The most famous area for temperate rainforest is over here. Let's go back real quick. Thought I had the pen activated. All right, it's over here. That in that Seattle area. Actually, it's just west of Seattle. It's going to be Olympic National Park. It's the Hoh Rainforest, HOH. It's a small little area. Everything is just super green. I've been there before. It is very, very cool. It's just where they believe that Bigfoot, the myth of Bigfoot, has originated from the temperate rainforest. Now, it's a rainforest, so it gets a ton of rain annually. But it has pretty moderate temperatures. It does get cold, but why does it not really freeze too much? And that's because of its location next to the ocean. So the ocean influencing it, coming over there, winds prevailing off of the ocean actually will keep the temperatures pretty moderate. So even in the hot summertime, this area is pretty moderate through the winter. So it stays pretty limited in its fluctuation. The temperate seasonal forest, the deciduous forest, it's where we live. If you're not familiar with where we live, go outside. Spend a lot more time outside. You'll understand that we have 4 seasons. So we have spring, summer, winter, and fall. All right. In the fall, the leaves drop from the trees. They change color and drop. Now, not all the leaves, because some of our pine trees will keep their leaves. Some different species of trees actually kind of hold on their leaves. It's usually due to the evolutionary biology and the way in which the leaf structure is designed. But they drop their leaves. Why do they do this? Again, it's to prevent water loss. There's main growing seasons in the spring, summer, and fall, and then kind of like a dormant season in the winter. The animals that live here have evolved to be that way as well. All right, some of the major mammals will actually go through a hibernative state. Some will just go into what's called a deep sleep or a torpor, like bears. Bears do not truly hibernate. They actually go into a deep sleep. A true hibernator will lower its metabolism and lower its body temperature way down, where bears do not do that. They can slow down their heart rate, slow down their metabolism, but they do not lower their body temperature way down. The tropical rainforest, super awesome area to go visit, home to the most biodiversity on the planet. If you get a chance to go, I highly recommend going to the tropical rainforest. I've been to tropical rainforests on a couple different locations. I've been to Belize, to Costa Rica, the Amazon. Every single one of them, I would say, is absolutely beautiful and incredibly cool. They're under immense threats from human actions, however, whether it be poaching, logging, agriculture. Just a year ago, everyone was talking about the rainforests of the Amazon being burned. And the reason why they're being burned is because people are converting it over to agricultural fields. We talk about biodiversity and mining. Mining is another threat. People are going into the Amazon for gold mining, whatnot. Every year, this area receives more annual sunlight and more energy and precipitation than anywhere else, and it allows for the greatest biodiversity and ecosystem structure because the organisms are getting all these things they need. Shrubland, also known as chaparral, okay? This is, when I was in school, this was known as the Mediterranean climate. Why was it known as the Mediterranean climate? Because it was found pretty much around the Mediterranean. One easy way to remember where this climate exists is if it produces wine. If it is a wine growing region, it is going to be a Mediterranean climate. So we think about different areas of the world that where massive volumes of wine are produced. California, South Africa, South Africa and Australia. All of them are known for producing their wines, along with the Mediterranean region. So that is where else you can find the chaparral. It's dominated by shrubland, so it's low-growing shrubs, not necessarily trees. All right. It will burn sometimes, but a lot of these plants actually have a waxy coating to their leaves, not like a true desert waxy coating, but something to prevent a lot of water loss. Because it is dry during the summers, they don't want to lose a lot of water. Grasslands. Big difference between grasslands and forested areas is precipitation. Trees can grow in grasslands if they get enough precipitation. Right? It's just not the case. On average, there's less precipitation, and they just don't grow as well. So grasslands receive less precipitation than forests, but more than deserts, characterized by grasses. Okay, grasses. Sometimes the grasses can get very, very tall. 6-8 foot high grasses. Depending on the amount of grazers moving through the area, feeding on that grass is actually how it's going to cycle its growing seasons. The thing about grasses is the root systems for grasses sometimes are much bigger than even trees. So some of the roots and grasses can go down like 20 feet. North America, our temperate grassland, we commonly refer to as the prairie. All right, and that's where we see our bison and various things like that. The difference between a temperate grassland and a savanna is that it is tropical. A savanna is tropical, so it's in the warmer environments. When you think of a savanna, you're probably thinking of this stereotypical image right here, where you have antelope walking along, you have an acacia tree in the background, some dry grass as some organisms are just moving through. All right. It's just the same as our prairie, just drier and hotter. Okay, so it's just a little bit hotter. Deserts of the world. Deserts of the world are really interesting in that they lack water, and obviously that's the big part, but the lack of water is what causes their temperature swings. Water is a thermal buffer. Without water actually controlling and modifying the temperature, it actually allows the temperatures to spike all the way up to 100 degrees during the daytime to sometimes freezing at night. Think of the last time you experienced a temperature swing greater than 30 degrees on a day. Now, think that every day they might experience 70-degree temperature swings. It's a very interesting habitat to be in. The organisms are incredibly adapted to it. They don't want to lose water. They want to conserve water at all costs. All the organisms survive there because of those harsh conditions, but they are adapted to it. And unfortunately, it does have a lower biodiversity than most areas, but that's just because it lacks water. It lacks water, therefore it lacks a lot of the plants that can grow, and therefore the insects that will eat those plants, and just that big, elaborate food chain. It is still a complex food web, but it is not nearly as diverse as the tropical rainforests. The tundra. Tundra is a very, very cold grassland. It is characterized by permafrost. Permafrost meaning permanently frozen soil. And if I get back on my soapbox about climate change, that permanently frozen soil is melting. So we're running into some problems, and we'll eventually talk about later in the year about methane being produced and all other things that are associated with it. During the summer months, it's incredibly productive. High amounts of insect diversity, bird avian diversity, and mammals are surviving and thriving. In the winter, it is incredibly harsh habitat. No trees, cold, windy, practically a freezing desert. So it is a very, very short window of productivity, but when it is during its productive months, it's very productive. Now, that's the major biomes, but how does it actually change with altitude? One of the things we know is as we go up a mountain, all right, as you go up a mountain, it gets colder, right? And actually, as you go up a mountain, you're actually going to see, you can actually hike through different climatic conditions and different biomes. If you were going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro, located pretty darn close to the equator in Kenya and Tanzania, as you start the bottom, you're in tropical rainforest. And then eventually you work your way all the way up to the very, very top, which is practically tundra. It's technically an alpine area, but just below the alpine area, you'll find your tundra. But in between, you'll find grasslands, you'll find different deciduous forests, you'll find temperate forests. All these different things are all found in that area. And it's very interesting because as you go up, the climatic conditions change. It gets colder and there's less precipitation as you go up. And then eventually there's less soil formation and all these other things that are all connected together. So as you go up a mountain, it's incredibly interesting to understand that you are going to be experiencing different climatic conditions, and you'll actually walk and hike through those different conditions. Where do we find the biomes of the world? Well, this is kind of a rough distribution, so you can kind of see where everything's at. You see in the tropical regions, right in here, you have the Amazon rainforest and the tropical rainforest, especially over here in Indonesia and whatnot. Then moving on from there, you have your grasslands. Okay, these are your tropical grasslands, your savannas, your deserts. Your deserts kind of exist around the same lines of latitude. We're going to talk about that later on in the year. But you'll notice deserts exist around 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south. So the big deserts of the world, the Sahara Desert, the Namib Desert, the outback of Australia, all of those major deserts of the world exist in those different areas. Deciduous forest, here's our prairie, our grassland. Here's our Mediterranean, our chaparral. All right. Then we go back up to deciduous forest. Above the deciduous forest, you find the boreal forest or the coniferous forest. And then eventually we get to our tundra. And that leads us to recapping our lesson here. Do you know how to classify a biome? Hopefully. Do you know what a climograph will look like with a line for temperature and bar graphs for precipitation? Do you know the major terrestrial biomes of the planet? If you do, you are ready to go and you are set for the next lesson. If you don't, shoot me an email. We'll catch up and we'll go through this stuff. All right. Thank you.
You like that lesson? I know you did. So why don't you go ahead and smash that like button right now. Go ahead and comment. Tell all your friends about how great that lesson was. And make sure you subscribe because I'm going to keep bringing you AP environmental content that you're going to want to watch. Or do whatever else those other YouTube channels tell you to do. And with that, Maloney.